The sharp crash of porcelain against tile still echoes in my memory. I remember standing there in my own kitchen, a plate shattered at my feet. 100 eyes suddenly turned on me as if I were a stranger in my son's house. My cheeks burned, my throat tightened, and in that frozen moment, I felt as small and exposed as I had ever been. The laughter from the dining room hung in the air for a beat, then trickled back as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. It was supposed to be a celebration. My son, Daniel, had just earned a promotion, and his wife, Claire, insisted on hosting a grand party. She wanted the house full, and it was neighbors, colleagues, friends, people whose names I barely knew. The music was cheerful, the glasses sparkled under the lights, and the whole evening had the glossy sheen of success. To everyone else, Claire looked like the perfect hostess, gliding from guest to guest in her elegant dress, smiling as if she carried the whole event effortlessly. What no one saw was the truth. For days, it had been my hands preparing every dish, polishing silverware, scrubbing corners until my joints throbbed. I had carried tray after tray into the dining room, slipping into the background, quietly making sure everything stayed flawless. I told myself that this was what mothers did, that supporting my son meant letting Claire shine. But when she turned on me, loud enough for the guests to hear, and brushed me aside like I was an unwelcome servant, the illusion cracked. The sting of her words lingered longer than the sound of the breaking plate. I could feel the humiliation crawl through me, deeper than I wanted to admit. Yet behind that pain, another feeling stirred, one I hadn't allowed myself in years. A faint, rising spark of anger. That night, I realized the moment wasn't just about a broken plate or a sharp remark. It was the breaking point of something I had carried in silence for too long. And as I bent down to gather the shards, I knew I would never be able to put myself back together in quite the same way again. This was not the first time I had been dismissed, ignored, or treated as if I didn't belong, but it would be the last time I let it pass without consequence. 6 years is a long time to disappear in plain sight. That is what happened to me after I moved into my son Daniel's house. At first, I told myself it would only be temporary, a place to steady myself after losing my husband, a way to stay close to family while I found my footing again. Daniel had insisted I come, and I wanted to believe it would be a blessing for us all. But slowly, almost without noticing, I slipped into a role that felt less like family and more like a shadow. Every morning began before the sun came up. I cooked breakfast, packed lunches, and scrubbed counters while the rest of the house slept. My hands were always busy washing, folding, dusting, yet it felt as if the work erased me instead of proving my worth. When guests admired the spotless rooms or praised the food, Claire would smile gracefully and accept the compliments as if they were hers alone. I learned to swallow the sting, reminding myself that peace was more important than pride. Daniel hardly saw the truth. His job consumed him. He left before dawn and returned late at night, exhausted and grateful that his wife had everything under control. He never questioned why I looked tired, why my back ached, why I seemed to vanish into the background of his own home. To him, Claire was a devoted partner who had welcomed his widowed mother with open arms. But I knew better. I felt it in the sharp sighs when I entered a room, the way she assigned chores with a clipped tone reserved just for me, the look in her eyes that told me I was an inconvenience, not a person. Each small humiliation chipped away at me. And still, I stayed silent, I told myself that silence was strength, that enduring quietly was my gift to Daniel, so he could live in peace without conflict between the women he loved. Yet silence is not neutral. It grows heavy, pressing on your chest until breathing itself feels like a burden. That night at Daniel's birthday party, when Claire stripped away the last shred of my dignity in front of a crowd, I finally understood. My silence had not protected the family, it had only protected her cruelty. As I bent to gather the broken pieces of that plate, something inside me shifted. I knew I could not go on as I had before. I didn't realize it then, but that was the first step toward uncovering a truth far more devastating than I could have imagined. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day when I usually slipped out early to pick up groceries before the stores grew crowded. The air was crisp, and I remember walking past the downtown hotel, my mind already drifting toward dinner plans. That was when I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, Claire. Stepping gracefully out of a red sports car, her hair freshly styled, her handbag swinging like she was headed for a runway instead of an errand. My stomach clenched when I realized she wasn't alone. Beside her was Mark, Daniel's oldest friend, a man who had been part of our family gatherings for years. They leaned close, their laughter spilling into the street, and before I could even process what I was seeing, I caught the unmistakable sight of an embrace far too intimate for friends. My body froze. The grocery list trembled in my hand. For a split second, I wanted to look away, to convince myself it was nothing, some misunderstanding. My mind scrambled for excuses. Maybe it was just a hug. Maybe I was tired and imagining things. But the truth was undeniable. Their closeness, their touch, the way she tilted her face toward his, it was a betrayal written in plain daylight. I walked home in a fog, clutching my bag like it could anchor me. That evening, as Daniel and Mark sat in the living room, cheering at the game as if nothing had happened, I stirred soup at the stove and fought to keep my hands steady. Claire floated in and out, her hand brushing against his arm in subtle ways my son never noticed. My heart ached for him, for the trust he gave so freely to both of them. I told myself to stay silent, to let it go, but the images wouldn't fade. Over the next few weeks, I began to see patterns I had ignored before, errands that took too long, messages that never appeared on their phones when Daniel was near, small amounts of money missing from the accounts. The puzzle pieces fell together slowly, and each one cut deeper than the last. I started keeping notes, dates, times, places. I snapped blurry photos when I could. It felt strange, almost wrong, to spy from the shadows of my own life, but silence had already cost me too much. This time, I needed the truth, undeniable and clear. What I didn't know then was that this betrayal was only the surface of something much darker. And once I stepped onto the path of uncovering it, there would be no turning back. The notes I kept in my dresser drawer, the blurry photos on my old phone, I knew deep down they would never be enough. If I confronted Claire and Mark with only that, they would twist the story until I looked like a bitter old woman inventing tales. They were clever, practiced, and above all, confident in Daniel's trust. If I wanted to protect my son, I needed something undeniable, something they couldn't spin into a lie. I remember the day I walked into the small office above a bakery downtown. My heart pounded like I was trespassing in a world I didn't belong to. The sign on the door read, Hale Investigations. Inside, I met Richard Hale, a retired officer who now worked as a private investigator. His calm presence steadied me. I laid out my notes, my shaky photographs, and confessed what I had seen outside that hotel. For 2 long weeks, I lived with the weight of waiting. Every day I cooked, cleaned, and went through the motions while inside. My stomach knotted with dread. When Richard finally called me back, he placed a thick file on the desk between us. My hands shook before I even opened it. What I saw inside turned my blood cold. Clear photographs, no shadows, no blurs showed Claire and Mark together at restaurants, slipping into hotels, exchanging envelopes. Bank records revealed steady transfers from Daniel's accounts into places they should never have gone. But the worst was still to come. Richard had dug deeper, into archives and public records. Claire wasn't even Claire. Her real name was Carla Ruiz. Before she married my son, she had lived in Nevada under another identity entirely. He showed me a marriage certificate Carla legally wed to a man named Robert Castillo, which meant her marriage to Daniel wasn't valid at all. My chest tightened as the truth sank in the woman who had belittled me for years, had built her life on deception. And my son was only her latest victim. Piece by piece, Richard revealed more patterns of fraud, multiple husbands, drained accounts left in ruins. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a scheme, carefully crafted, with Mark as her partner in crime. I left his office clutching the file like a weapon. For years, she had treated me as powerless, invisible, a burden to be pushed aside. But in my hands now was the truth strong enough to tear down everything she had built. I didn't know yet how I would use it, but I knew this much: her empire of lies was about to fall. I kept the envelope in the back of my dresser drawer, tucked beneath old sweaters no one would ever bother to touch. From the outside, it looked ordinary, just a manila folder, sealed with a thin strip of tape. But inside, it carried the weight of an entire life built on lies. Every time I opened that drawer to put away clothes, my eyes lingered on it, and I felt my chest tighten. It was like keeping a loaded weapon in the house. I would catch myself staring at it, torn between 2 urges. One voice whispered that I should hand it to Daniel right away, end the charade, rip the blindfold from his eyes before Claire and Mark drained him of more than love and money. But another voice told me to wait, to be patient. If I rushed, they would deny everything, twist the story until Daniel doubted me instead of them. Timing would be everything. At night, when the house was quiet and I lay awake in the dark, I thought about what that envelope meant. It wasn't just proof of an affair. It was proof that Claire wasn't even the woman she claimed to be, that her entire marriage to my son was a fraud. It was names, dates, bank transfers, photographs sharp enough to slice through any excuse. It was the truth, bound together in paper and ink. There were moments when the temptation to act became almost unbearable. Once, during dinner, I watched Claire refill Daniel's glass of wine, laughing at something he said, her hand brushing his as if she were the most loving wife in the world. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from standing up and slamming the envelope down on the table. But I forced myself to swallow the urge. She would have a story ready. She always did. So I waited. I built routines around that envelope. Every few days, I checked to make sure it was still safe, smoothing down the flap as though my touch could keep its secrets locked inside. Sometimes, I imagined what the reveal would look like. Would I hand it to Daniel quietly? Just the 2 of us, so his heartbreak wouldn't be witnessed by others. or would I wait until the perfect moment, when Claire herself had crafted one of her elaborate lies, and then expose her in front of everyone? The weight of that choice never left me. Carrying the truth was its own kind of torment, but it was also a strange comfort. For years, I had been powerless, dismissed, made small in my own son's home. Now, for the first time, I held something stronger than her sharp words and false smiles. I held the end of her empire of deception. And I knew deep in my bones that the day would come when I would open that drawer, take out the envelope, and change everything. The moment was drawing closer, and when it arrived, there would be no going back. The night of the dinner party still plays in my memory like a scene etched in glass. Every detail is sharp, every sound amplified. The chandelier above cast a warm, golden light over the table, reflecting in polished silverware and half-filled wine glasses. Laughter floated easily through the room, but for me, it was hollow. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed my apron and felt the hard edge of the envelope tucked against my chest. For weeks, I had waited for this moment, rehearsing it in my mind, feeling the weight of truth grow heavier by the day. The table was alive with conversation. Claire, in her sapphire dress, played the perfect hostess, graceful, smiling, sipping compliments as if they were champagne. Daniel, my son, sat at her side, weary from work, yet clearly proud of her. And then there was Mark, the so-called friend, loud and confident as ever, stealing the room's attention with easy jokes. To everyone else, it looked like a picture of success. To me, it looked like a stage built on lies. I told myself to wait for the right moment. When Claire rose to toast Daniel, her glass raised high, her words dripping with false devotion, I knew I could not wait another second. My legs carried me forward before my mind could catch up. The room fell silent as I stepped out of the shadows. I felt every eye on me, but I didn't flinch. With steady hands, I placed the envelope on the table in front of her. The crinkle of paper as she opened it seemed louder than the music, louder than the murmur of the guests. When the first photograph slid into view, her face, her arms around Mark outside a hotel, the air was sucked out of the room. Her smile vanished, her skin drained of color. Mark's booming confidence shrank into silence. Daniel leaned forward, confusion turning quickly into devastation as more papers spilled out: bank transfers, a marriage certificate with another man's name, evidence of years of betrayal stacked neatly for everyone to see. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the sound of Claire's shallow breathing. Guests gasped, their chairs scraping as they pulled back, some whispering in disbelief, others simply staring at the wreckage of a life exposed. I didn't need to raise my voice. The proof spoke for me. Daniel's face is what haunts me most. He looked at Claire, then at Mark, as if the world he had built was crumbling beneath him. His shoulders sagged, his hands shook, and his eyes searched for something: an explanation, a denial, anything to soften the blow. But none came. The truth lay bare on the table, undeniable. Claire tried to gather the papers, her mouth moving without sound, but her collapse was complete. Mark stared at the floor, stripped of bravado. In that moment, I felt no triumph, only sorrow. This was justice, yes, but it was also the destruction of trust, of love, of the family Daniel believed he had. He finally stood, his voice steady, though his body trembled, and told them both to leave. The words were few, but they carried the weight of finality. Chairs scraped again, doors slammed, and within minutes, the house was silent, emptied of its false glitter. I stood beside my son, unsure if I should reach for him. The pain in his eyes told me he was somewhere far away, grappling with a reality he had never imagined. The confrontation was over, but the fallout had only begun. That night marked the end of years of silence and the beginning of something else, something harder, but maybe, in time, something truer. And that is where I will take you next, the long path of healing that followed. In the days after Claire's departure, the house felt hollow in a way I had never known. The walls that once echoed with tension now carried only silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. Not at first, it was the heavy stillness that follows a storm. Dishes sat untouched, chairs pushed back from the table, and Daniel's eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen his world crumble overnight. I remember finding him one morning at the kitchen counter, his hands covering his face, shoulders trembling. For years he had looked past my pain, convinced by lies, but now the truth stood before him like broken glass. He came to me, not with excuses, but with sorrow. His words were not spoken aloud. I felt them in the way his arms clung to me, the way his breath caught as if begging for forgiveness without knowing how. I held him. For all my anger, for all my wounds, he was still my son. And in that embrace, I found the strength to let forgiveness begin its slow work. Life did not heal in a day. The grief lingered like a shadow, showing itself in quiet moments, the missing shoes by the door, the absence of her sharp voice in the evenings. Yet with every sunrise, a little light returned. I started to reclaim the parts of myself I had buried. I bought paints and brushes and filled afternoons with color, letting the strokes carry the emotions I had kept locked away. I pulled down books that had gathered dust, losing myself in stories that reminded me there were still worlds of beauty and hope. Daniel, too, began to rebuild. He threw himself into work at first, perhaps to numb the pain, but in time, I saw him lift his head again. Slowly, he let people back into his heart. There was a young woman, kind and steady, who did not try to control him or me. I watched as he learned to smile again in her presence, and I prayed silently that this time he would choose love rooted in honesty. What struck me most was how laughter began to find its way back into our home. It started faintly, an awkward chuckle over a memory, and then grew into shared meals where the air was no longer sharp with unspoken tension. I realized that truth, as painful as it had been, had set us free. I often thought about the envelope, now tucked away in a drawer. It had been a weapon once, a shield of proof. But now, it was only paper. The real power was in the courage it gave me to stop being silent, to stand for dignity even when my voice trembled. Looking back, I see that healing was never about erasing what had happened. It was about choosing not to let betrayal define the rest of our story. I found resilience in the quiet, in the small steps of reclaiming joy, in believing that even after deep loss, life could still offer something gentle and good. And as I sit here, telling you this, I know the journey is not fully finished. One last reflection remains, one more truth I want to leave behind. But that belongs to the final chapter. When I look back now, it feels like I lived through a storm that could have broken me, yet somehow it shaped me instead. The humiliation, the betrayal, the nights I swallowed my pain in silence, they were heavy, almost unbearable. but they also pushed me toward a truth I had hidden from myself for far too long, that my dignity mattered, that my voice mattered, and that silence, no matter how noble it seems, can slowly suffocate the soul. I carried shame and heartbreak in ways I never spoke of, and for years, I thought enduring quietly was the only way to keep peace. But I learned that peace built on lies and suppression is fragile. It collapses the moment truth forces its way through. When I finally stood up, when I chose to uncover what was hidden, I did not just expose someone else's deceit. I reclaimed the part of myself I had abandoned. The envelope, the confrontation, the aftermath, they were not just moments of drama. They were turning points in my life. They taught me that love cannot survive without honesty, that family bonds cannot thrive without respect, and that self-worth is not something you can sacrifice in the hope of saving someone else. If there is one message I want to leave with you, it is this: do not silence yourself in the face of disrespect. Do not bury your dignity just to hold on to relationships that chip away at your spirit. The truth may hurt, but it also heals. It clears the air, breaks the chains, and makes room for something healthier, something real. I am not the same woman I was when this began. I am stronger, softer in some ways, but steadier in others. And though the scars remain, they remind me every day that survival is not enough. We are meant to live with dignity, joy, and freedom. If my story has touched you, if you see a part of your own struggles reflected here, I invite you to share your thoughts. Like this video, share it with someone who may need courage, and leave a comment with your reflections. Because sometimes, knowing we are not alone is the first step toward finding our own strength.